What's up, guys? Welcome to the Coverbandconfidential podcast. This is a special episode. Today, in studio for the first time, I've got my buddy Rob, who's a drummer and is currently the full-time touring drummer for Skid Row. So, Rob, thank you so much for coming out and saying hey.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So we're like neighbors. We
are.
You're like, I'm like 15, 20 minutes away from here.
I don't know how I don't see you in Trader Joe's every other day.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a haul for us.
Is it?
Well,
Okay.
yeah, from here, you got to go all the way down.
All right.
Yeah.
I guess I spend so much time there, I lose track of exactly where it is.
This is what happens is musicians get older, they move out to the suburbs, and we just, we talk about that when we see each other, isn't it? It's just we talk about like kids and
taxes and all the things I never thought I'd have to worry about or deal with in my life. Here we are. So
it's a beautiful thing, man.
It is. So I was trying to do the math on the drive over here. You and I have probably known each other for 20 years.
Yeah,
I would say. Yeah.
Because I moved back to Atlanta from Nashville in 2004 and kind of started hanging out in them clubs.
Then in the clubs, yep.
Probably met you for the first time at 10 High, more than likely.
I would say so, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that seemed to be the hot spot for all of us back then.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So the intent of this conversation is to kind of, one, chart your path up to this point, and then kind of like how you ended up in the position that you're in today, and just kind of trying to find some insights maybe for the folks who are checking this out.
Sure.
If there's anything that they could glean from your tale of success.
I'm a cautionary tale. So I've made a few mistakes along the way.
Hey, that's what this whole thing is for. It's sharing people, hey, this did not work for me. You should not do this.
I'm not sure any of it's worked for me, but I'll tell you what I know.
Right on. So when did you start playing?
I started playing drums. I've lost track of exactly what age I was. I was in 6th or 7th grade. I started playing drums like most people through a school music program. Not because I knew what I was doing or had an intense desire to play drums. I should back up. The beginning of the story, my father took my family, my mother, my sister, and I to see Roy Orbison. That's the first concert that I ever saw.
Nice.
And like most people, when they see their first concert, their first show, it absolutely changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. So from that point forward, I knew that I wanted to do something in music. I didn't really know exactly what it was. It wasn't one particular thing that jumped out at me. Yeah. I was just so caught up in the excitement of all of it, just seeing this thing. And at the time, I was too young to know exactly who Roy Orbison was and how big of a presence and what an icon I was seeing. I just knew that this whole thing was larger than life, and I wanted in on it in some way.
Nice.
So through the school band program, started playing drums, or what they call percussion. I'm doing finger quotes. So when you start at a young age in school, they kind of give you a mishmash of a few melodic instruments and your practice pad and all the things a kid doesn't want to do. We all want to sit down and just make noise, but you have to start somewhere. So I started with percussion. I want to say it was either 6th or 7th grade. And then at that point, after playing for a couple of years, just kind of found myself constantly being drawn to the actual drum kit itself. So that's when it started for me. But like most kids that age, I wasn't very disciplined. I wasn't very studious. Was actually kicked out of the school band at one point for not keeping up with lessons.
Nice.
So when I mentioned I'm a cautionary tale, that's one thing. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would have been much more disciplined with it. I would have taken the educational side and the technical side of it much more serious as a young kid. But I didn't know that this many years later, it would be something that I absolutely love and continue to do to this day. But that's kind of how it started for me. And I think like a lot of young people, it was also when I transitioned from school band to the garage, if you will, when I really started attempting to play drum set and play music that I was choosing and not what was being given to me through the school band program, it became a social thing for me as well. I had a couple of buddies in the small town that I grew up in. And a few of these guys they're 2 and 3 and 4 years older than I am. And a couple of them can buy beer. And here I am in the garage playing drums, and we're hacking our way through Ramones songs and AC/DC songs. So that was kind of where it all started for me. And it wasn't until a handful of years later that I really decided that I loved it and I cared and I wanted to take it serious. That didn't happen for me until probably my early 20s, which seems kind of strange. A lot of people from the get-go, they fall in love with it and they instantly become bonded to it. And I think for a while the actual art of playing drums hadn't really sunk in yet.
So before you make that decision in your 20s, like what's your path? What is the thing that you're like, this is what I'm going to do?
Well, that's a good question. As a kid, so I knew that I wanted to do it. And in putting it in context, when this was all happening for me, it was the video age. So the day and age of MTV and all these things, all these exciting things were happening at that time with music, and MTV was a very big, I know a lot of people a lot of people out there don't realize that MTV used to actually play music videos, and it used to be music television. But for young people back then, that was
culture.
It sure was. And it was really, for me, that was my vision of what it meant to go out and play in a band.
Right.
So at that point, I knew that I wanted to do that, but I'm a kid in a small town who didn't really take the educational side of playing serious, just in a garage with my friends. I had no idea how you do that. Okay, so that's a great goal and that's a great dream for a young kid. How do you do that? I didn't know at the time. I had no idea. So like a lot of us just started just playing in bands. And slowly throughout the course of my young adult life, I made a lap around the country, moved several times until I finally found what I felt like was a good home base for me to actually try to establish some type of career, if you will. Yeah, that was a very long process for me.
So when did you land here then, in Atlanta?
Yeah, my memory of that is a little fuzzy. I came here with the intention of staying for 3 weeks, and I believe that was 26 years ago. So I either just ran out of energy and didn't want to move again, or I found exactly where I was supposed to be. It's been great to me. As you know, the music scene in Atlanta, and specifically the rock music scene, throughout I would say the second half of the 90s and into the early 2000s, it was an amazing time to be in the Atlanta music scene. It was a very, very exciting thing. There was a lot of really cool things happening. And I suppose that there were in a lot of different cities around the country, but there were a lot of things that really resonated with me happening here, the rock music and some of the alternative rock and the hard rock and things that were happening here. I immediately fell in love with the scene. And if you remember, you had mentioned the 10 High and so many of the other clubs and the venues and the bands. It was a really fun time to be a musician in this city.
100%. Because I mean, the thing that I always loved was that there were things that were uniquely Atlanta. And there were acts that were very much a part of the brand.
Absolutely.
And it was cool to see how, in fact, what seemed like this big world was actually a lot smaller once I got into it. And the fact that, the friendships and relationships that I've been able to cultivate through the years with guys that, I have autographs of probably somewhere here, that I waited in line at a Blockbuster Music for or whatever. Right. And now these guys are my friends. It was a very cool time.
It really was. And I do think that was part of the time. I think that was happening in a lot of places. For whatever reason, you have the hard rock movement of the Sunset Strip in the 80s, and then obviously the Seattle movement, and you have certain cities that are kind of known for their scene exploding and changing the arc of pop culture or the mainstream. And I felt like Atlanta really had its own personality and its own identity. It never turned into something that was driving pop culture or the mainstream. But I felt like it had this really cool thing to it, and I found that right away. So I guess that's part of why I never left after the original plan of 3 weeks.
So you go to Atlanta for 3 weeks. You're trying to figure out where you're going to land. How did you end up getting into the local music scene when you got here?
Creative loafing, which
Okay.
yeah, which is a huge part of any musician's life or any artist really. So this is obviously pre-internet, and you know we were just dabbling with email, and we were all trying to figure out how to online date when we were young, before the internet was just driving everything. So we have, and for those of you who aren't familiar, in Atlanta we had a weekly print magazine that was the arts and entertainment guide for Atlanta, and to a degree Athens and some of the surrounding areas, but primarily Atlanta. And there were ads for drummer needed, bass player needed, and there were every venue in town, their lineup for the next month, or sometimes 2 months or whatever it was. We would wait every week to get creative loafing to see who was coming to town, who was playing. And I immediately started going through creative loafing and highlighting ads and doing exactly what you're supposed to do, and what young musicians, I'm sure it looks different nowadays. There are different ways to go about it.
Craigslist is the new creative loafing.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. So that shows my age, that I wouldn't even know how to go about doing that now. But at the time, I just really just dove in and I started doing it. And you'll remember, you know, we had Locals Only, and we had Steve Craig, who was a DJ on 99X, but he was a massive supporter 100%. Of the local music scene here. So I would, on Sunday nights on the Locals show, I would make notes. And I remember sitting in my apartment listening to these local music shows, these music programs on the radio. And I would write down names of bands that I found interesting, or, oh, that sounds like something I would want to do. And I would actually make notes, and then I would look in creative loafing to see where they were playing, or when they were playing, or what was happening. So I just kind of jumped right in.
And were you like going out to venues and like shaking hands, like, "Hi, I'm Rob, I'm new here," or anything like that? I don't know. That's not really like your personality, but
yeah. So yeah, I did it, but you're absolutely right. It's so counterintuitive to my personality. Have a couple drinks in me, and I think I'm the funniest guy in the room. So yeah, I started hanging out in the clubs and introducing myself to people, and trying to meet people, and trying not to embarrass myself. And that's very hard for me, for my personality. But I was young, and I was just hungry, and I wanted to do the thing, and I wanted to get out and meet people. It didn't always go as planned. I'm sure there were plenty of people that I didn't make a great first impression on, but that's part of life, and that's part of being young. I look back on it fondly now. I can laugh about it. I had no clue what I was doing. I was just a young adult with an idea and a plan, and just kind of jumped in and tried to figure it out. I know that doesn't make for great advice.
Well, no, actually, it's perfect advice, because the thing that musicians, a lot of them don't understand, is that there's very much an online component to it. It is a fantastic medium to share your talent, and you know, for as much as people use Craigslist locally, there's never been a way that a person could sit at home and do something and everybody find out about it.
Right.
Just purely based on talent, you know? But there is a part of that just, if you want to do this as a profession, if you want to perform as a job, there's this face-to-face thing that has to happen.
Sure.
And a lot of people have a hard time. Either they're shy, you know, they don't know how to, you know, to introduce themselves or ingratiate themselves into an existing music scene.
Right. And it can be very intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly for somebody like myself, like most young adults, I was a bit shy, but incredibly insecure. And then you're an artist on top of it. So how many artists do we know that are very secure and confident in their art? Not many. Usually there's a level of insecurity that comes along with doing something that's immediately put up for critique or judgment. Whenever you're doing something that is a form of expression, or you're putting emotion and things that are very personal into, whether it's songwriting or whatever it is, there's usually a higher degree. I shouldn't say higher. This probably goes with any occupation, but I have found that there's typically a high degree of insecurity behind something artistic, and that's my experience.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that works for the shy musician is that you hope that the thing you just did is interesting enough for people to approach you as opposed to,
well, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Is that the quality of your work, for lack of a better term, your product, if you will, speaks for itself.
Right.
That's the goal. That's the hope. But, and this was not exclusive to Atlanta, we see it all day long now on Instagram and these social media platforms, these young kids who are incredible players. They're incredible musicians. But that was happening in the real world back when we were young. Sure. I showed up here and man, I thought I was a competent drummer, and I was a hardworking drummer. I was good. I was capable, and I advocate for this. I think that when you're pursuing something like this or whatever it is, you should always be striving to level up, if you will. And anytime you jump into a talent pool or an environment that might be slightly larger than what you're used to, it's intimidating.
Yeah.
You immediately come across players who might be several levels further along in the timeline than you are. But that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted at that point in my life. You're never going to grow. In my opinion, you're not going to grow unless you really just jump in, push yourself. It's intimidating. It's back to the being insecure and things like that. That's what I wanted, but there was a lot of that happening in Atlanta at that time, and probably still is. I'm just
we're a little out of the rotation.
I'm out of the loop. Yeah.
So what would you consider your first big break? You know, you're out there, you're making a name for yourself. At what point did you land something that felt like it may not have been like, oh, this is it, but it's like, this is the first thing that felt like I'm reaching the goals that I've set for myself?
So a pivotal moment for me with my progression here in the Atlanta music scene, I was a band by the name of Elliot, James and the Snakes.
Yes.
So I'm not going to assume that your viewers or your listeners know.
It's you and me, but
okay.
Literally that's it.
All right. So that particular band was formed by my good friend JJ Jones. Great guitar player. He was well known for several different bands that he had played in Atlanta for many years. And he was coming off of a band called the Pleasantdales, if you remember the Pleasantdales. Mm-hmm. Great local band. They did some regional touring and put out a couple of records, and they were a great band. So JJ was moving on from that band, put together a band called Elliot, James and the Snakes. I was one of the snakes. I was the snake on drums.
There you go.
And it was great. It was fun. It was a really cool thing. We were doing some regional touring and playing around town and having a really good time with it. And we felt like it was to whatever degree at that point, it was starting to get a little bit of traction, and we were doing some fun gigs in town. So fast forward to maybe a year or so into playing in that band, JJ was hired as the auxiliary, the second guitar player in Marvelous 3,
right?
Which everybody knows from around town, Butch Walker and those guys, and they were hot. They were hot at that time. So this is
this second album. So that's, I think, post A album.
So this would be Ready, Sex, Go, which would be their
like
third,
the first of the tours. But
correct.
Like,
their
right
third full length record. Mm-hmm. But this is the one. So Hey album was the one that broke them, and then they got their major label deal, and that record was re-released. And this was the big one. So this is kind of the do or die record. All eyes are on these guys. And you'll remember all of this going on at that time.
I was right up front, man.
Yeah, it was so fun watching that band and their progression, and obviously everybody here in town has such a huge attachment to those guys and what they created at that time. So I find myself playing drums in a band with the guy who is going out, and he's he's no less marvelous than the other three guys, but he's now the auxiliary guy. So he's the fourth guy off to the side of the stage there. So how does that affect me? Well, we were fortunate enough to be able to go out and open a handful of shows.
Nice.
The Marvelous Three was playing around the Southeast and in different areas. And again, they were hot at that time. So that was kind of just by accident through somebody else's good luck and good fortune and hard work. I was just in the right place at the right time. So that was kind of the first thing I did around town that people cared about and people noticed. And from there, I can definitely see where it opened some doors for me and changed. It was completely unexpected. I was just really, like a lot of stories in any industry, but specifically in the music industry, right place at the right time. And you don't realize it at the time, but then several years later, you can look back and connect the dots of how this led to this, and then that eventually or hopefully leads to something else. And that was the first thing that I did here that really pushed me along, if you will.
They say that luck is preparation meets opportunity, and that's how guys that elevate themselves in the in this particular career path, you do the work, and then something presents itself, and your ability to deliver on that is
absolutely
is what you get.
You're ready for it. So you don't know when or you don't know how, but you kind of, a lot of us operate on blind faith and whatever motivates you, whatever your belief system or your spiritual side of things or your faith-based mindset, a lot of us operate on that, and you just have to sort of understand that something is around the corner, and you don't it's probably going to be when you least expect it. It's probably not going to happen the way you envision it, or from maybe the person you think it's going to happen with. You have to trust that process. But like you said, meanwhile, your job is to be preparing and doing the work and staying committed to the process. And that's often easier said than done, but that's the wise old man in me speaking.
Well, so kind of the reason why I'm getting to that point is that at this point is probably where our paths cross.
I would say so, yeah.
Because from my perspective, because again, I was coming in from out of town and trying to figure out all of that stuff too, like what does a guitar player look like?
Right.
What does a guitar player, where do they hang out?
That's right.
All of that stuff. And so my impression when I got to town was that when I was out at shows, man, Rob sure is playing a lot of these gigs with multiple groups, because I think I met you, it was either through Rockets to Ruin or through the Warm Guns.
Okay.
Because those were two bands that like I kept up with pretty intently, just because, Mark Donnell, there was a through line with Mark Donnell's being in Butch's group, Brand New Immortals. And so the fact that he was in this kind of funky, like disco rock kind of thing, I love the Warm Guns.
It's amazing. I'm glad you mentioned that name. They were incredibly cool. And it was this weird hybrid of techno and funk and soul kind of thing. And anybody from around Atlanta who knew their frontman, Chris Cox, he's a very eccentric, charismatic performer. They had all these really cool elements. They were just a fascinating thing to me.
And actually he was here, this monitor that's sitting here is his.
Okay.
It's a prompter thing I'm helping him set up. But yeah, again, small world, we're all kind of connected.
Yeah.
And the thing I liked about those two groups, beyond the fact the music was really good, was that there was intent behind, there was a style to it.
Right.
There was an intentionality behind the performance and the way that people dressed. And so it became very clear that you were affiliating yourselves with groups that were taking things seriously. And so immediately I'm like, this is a guy that I want to know. And, through playing gigs together and just goofing off at meddlesome karaoke and stuff. I mean, honestly, that's how I ingratiated myself into this scene.
It was a great way to do it, and probably still is.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing is still going strong. What, 20 years later?
Yeah,
it's
20 plus at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. But you're absolutely right. And anybody who's experienced it or was a part of it, it started out as a musician's hang. It really kind of started out as a Monday night jam session, and then it blew up to be this really cool phenomenon, if you will.
Oh yeah.
But it did start out as musicians' night. Nobody's playing on Monday nights, so let's all just get together, hang out here, have a couple beers, and it was a great way to meet people and get up and you play a song or two, and everybody had a chance to see you play. You could meet people, hang out. That was a great time to be a part of that.
Well, and through that, though, I feel like some of the contacts that you're affiliated with now might have kind of intersected, because at least from my perspective, the first time I remember there being like some hot shot at Meddlesome, I was like, oh, Rachel's here.
That's
and
right.
so, some random person would pick 18 in Life, and then the guy from Skid Row would come up and freaking play it with
That's
them.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure people would have chose that if they knew one of the actual guys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
talk about an intimidating moment, but he was great. He always had a great time with it. He always enjoyed himself. But if I signed up to sing a song at karaoke after a couple drinks, I don't know if I'd want the actual guy.
I think that happened to me once, because I signed up for I did Youth Gone Wild one time.
Yeah.
I think he was there,
Right.
but it was like totally not intentional. And
But you can actually sing. I can't.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
But they don't have drummyoke. That's not like a thing.
Well, that's true.
You guys are too particular.
Yeah.
But yeah, every time I just remember seeing it, because like the thing about you specifically was that you had that big Tommy Lee kick. Like you were the big kick guy.
I was overcompensating. I decided at one point in my life that I needed to play a 28-inch kick drum. So.
It may not carry, on video and stuff. Rob's not a big guy.
Right.
He's compact and efficient.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were playing the biggest freaking kit.
It was the biggest one I could find. Yeah. So funny story. That kick drum is the center of the story. The first time I actually met Rachel, which we were talking earlier about how people's paths kind of intersect, and then you don't always know exactly where that's going to go. The first time he and I met, you may remember Metro Rehearsal Studios, which was behind Masquerade, the old Masquerade, which sadly is no longer. The structure is still there, but it's not the Masquerade.
It's like it's an apartment complex.
It's a completely different thing.
That's what this is. That's 695 North Avenue.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
peace, man.
So you know exactly where I'm talking about. So Metro Rehearsal Studios was a warehouse space directly behind Masquerade. And I had a rehearsal room. It was Rockets to Ruin, a band I was playing in at the time. And I forgot who we were sharing a room with at the time. But I had the bright idea that I was going to refinish my drums. I know, that was everybody's reaction when I said I'm going to refinish my drums. Huh. So apparently I had too much spare time at this particular point in my life. So I decided I'm going to refinish these drums. And now we're talking about a 28-inch kick drum, this massive kick drum. And this is still, the internet is there, but it wasn't this wealth of knowledge and tutorials and resources for anything. You need a root canal. Now you just go online, you watch a tutorial, and you're fine. So this was kind of before all of that was happening. So I have no idea what I'm doing. So I decide I'm going to strip the finish off of this drum, and I'm going to refinish it. So I'm in my rehearsal room, they're not the most well-ventilated places to do this. And I put stain on this cool red stain on this drum. And then my idea was to clear coat it polyurethane lacquer. Yeah. What you're not supposed to do is use polyurethane in an enclosed space, no ventilation. So I get a knock on the door, and it's the owner of Metro Rehearsal Studios and Rachel. They happened to stop by and wanted to know what the smell coming out of the room was. So I had to explain to everybody that, well, I just decided that I'm going to refinish these drums, ran to Home Depot, got some polyurethane, and unbeknownst to me, I'm spreading.
You're poisoning the entire building?
Yeah. So nice. that was my first meeting with the bass player for Skid Row.
That's not necessarily the way you want to open up that kind of dialogue, but
no, we all had a good laugh about it and agreed that it was probably not the smartest thing to do. So
that's the other thing I miss about Atlanta is just the rehearsal space world. There used to be so many great ones, and they're all gone.
Yeah, when you talk about a scene and the relationships and the camaraderie and things like that, that was a huge part of it. Those places were, I mean, they were destinations, even if you weren't rehearsing. You all knew on a Friday afternoon your buddies were going to be loading out for their gigs, and late Friday night or Saturday night, people are loading back in. There were people hanging out, just meeting one another, and guys and bands and everybody that we were associated with at that time. That was a huge part of the culture. I like to think that the younger players still have a version of that. I don't know.
I know there's still a few of them out there, but like going to Avatar or Thunderbox, you just go. Like it's it's Thursday.
Yeah.
Let's see who's over there.
Sure.
You know, and sometimes you'd run into your buddies. Other times you'd run into like these huge bands that were there for doing like tech rehearsals and stuff.
That's it.
This is wild, man.
Yeah. So they had you mentioned Avatar, and they had the big A room, and then they had the B room, and I mean these were full size tour rehearsal stages, and you never knew who was going to be in there, and sometimes these bands would lock them out for a week or 2 weeks at a time. So you and all of your buddies were kind of just milling around, hoping to meet somebody and listening. It was great. It was a great time. It was a huge part of that scene.
Man, I'm just getting wistful, man.
I know. You know? I know. It's just reminding me how old I am.
Yeah. You know, in the midst of that, when we were kind of playing around, Cleve was really bugging me to join Rockets.
Okay.
There was a period of time where like I think I was just kind of in the right spot.
Yep.
And because we did Nopi Nationals.
Oh my
Remember
gosh.
that gig?
I do, yeah.
And Cleve was just like, man, I think, think about it. And just like, it wasn't a good time.
Yeah.
But it's just like, we were almost bandmates there for like a hot second.
Yeah. That would have been
It would have been, no, we would have
fun.
We would have crushed. It would have been awesome.
You mentioned Nopi Nationals. Guaranteed every year that will be the hottest day of your life. Yeah.
I mean, we did Warp Tour, so it's pretty similar.
So at least Nopi Nationals is only 2 days, whereas Warp Tour is
summer.
A summer. Yeah.
All right. So from my perspective, you're basically the first call rock drummer in town. You're among there's 5 guys and you're in that group. At what point do you transition from gigging drummer to potentially being in the running for joining a group with this crazy legacy?
So we had mentioned Rachel Bolan, who is Skid Row's original bass player. He's one of the founding members. Coincidentally, he accidentally ended up in Atlanta around the same time I did. He was aiming for Charlotte, North Carolina. I had no target. I thought I was staying for 3 weeks, but we both found ourselves here. And I've shared my first meeting with Rachel, and I didn't think too much of it. It was really cool to meet him. I'm obviously a fan, and I didn't really even, at that time, I didn't even know that he was living here in town. So shortly after, started running into him in all these venues that we mentioned, in the rehearsal spaces, and through mutual friends. He and I had a proper introduction, and we had a good laugh, had a couple beers, and had a good laugh about our last meeting. So from there, he was playing in bands outside of Skid Row when he was able to do that. Mm-hmm. He would play in some bands around Atlanta, and started doing some studio work. And he was doing music for some television commercials and things like that. So he called me at one point and asked if I would want to come in the studio and do a couple of things that he was working on. So I was able to do that. And we sort of developed a working relationship, and then a friendship outside of that as well. So through him, I had met some of the other Skid Row guys and didn't know them nearly as well as I knew Rachel, but we worked together over the course of a few years. And then fast forward to 2006, he produced an album for the band Rockets to Ruin, which was a band that I was playing drums in at the time. So he produced a full-length record with us. So I was able to go in and again work with him in the studio, and this time do an actual full-length album. Worked with him, and shortly after, Skid Row put out a record in 2006, and we were able to go out on the road and open a handful of shows that they were doing at the time. So the other guys in the band had the opportunity to see me play, and you never know to what extent they were paying attention, but they had all met me and they were aware of me and kind of knew what I was doing at that time and what I was all about. So that's where the relationship with those guys really started, was through Rachel and working with him. And then fast forward to 2010, there was an opportunity. I was working with an artist called Wednesday 13, if you're familiar with
Murder
Wednesday.
Dolls. And
Correct. Yeah. So he had done a project that went under the name Gunfire 76. I did not play on the album, but I did the touring for that album. Came off of that tour knowing that Murder Dolls were going in to make their second record, and just knowing the writing was on the wall that there wasn't going to be any work past what we had already done. So Rachel contacted me and asked if I could cover a handful of Skid Row shows. And I can tell you, there's never a bad time to get that phone call, but that came at the perfect time because I honestly had no idea what I was going to do. I just didn't know what I was going to do next. And like a lot of us doing the band thing and the music thing, I was just really at a loss. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any opportunities at the moment. So not only did it come at the perfect time, but it was a great opportunity for me to go out and play. And shortly after the first couple of shows, it became a permanent thing for me.
so there was really not an audition per se. It was just they had a need and kind of knew your work.
Looking back on it, I think it's 50-50. They had all seen me play. They knew me. We weren't exceptionally close as far as them as a group and myself as an individual. I think the first few shows were sort of an audition process. We did get together. We rehearsed for 2 days. So if I remember correctly, our first show was Mississippi somewhere. So as I said, Rachel was living here in Atlanta. I was here in Atlanta. So the other guys flew here. We rehearsed at Rachel's house for a couple of days and drove out and played the first gig. It was great. I had a good time.
So how did you approach that whole opportunity though? Because again, you get a phone call and it's like, all right, I know these guys, I'm familiar with their work, but now I've got to show up and be the guy.
Right.
So how did you approach that whole process?
So that was it was a fun process for me, although it was intimidating. Any musician will understand the idea of listening to a song that you've heard your entire life. You know the arrangement, you can kind of play by instinct, and to a degree you can get through it.
Yeah.
Right. To an extent, there are certain things I'm not qualified to do, but these classic rock songs and these hard rock songs that I've grown up listening to, we know the arrangements. It's kind of in our subconscious, and it's just part of who we are. And then you sit down with the intention of, now I have to recreate it with the intention of sounding like the original. So that was something that I immediately focused on as a drummer. It's different to play the song or play a song and get through it and know the arrangement. But when you're attempting to recreate it so that somebody really feels like that's what they're nostalgic for, that's what they want to hear, it's a different mindset or it can be a different mindset.
Yeah.
And I immediately shifted into that other mindset, listening to the songs. Okay, what is absolutely critical? What would I miss if I went to see a band, they played the song, and me being a bit of a drum nerd and listening closely, what would I miss if it wasn't there? And then from there, you kind of figure out the elements that you really think are important So my mindset was to get as close as I was capable of getting. Now, obviously, I was working on not quite the timeline you would ideally like to have. It was a bit rushed, but that was my mindset going into it, is how close can I get to something that's pre-established, it's big. And when you're talking about songs that a band like that has, they're iconic songs in a lot of ways, and to a lot of people they're very special. And I put myself in that category. It was really important to me to try to get as close as I could with a lot of those songs. And then in doing that, you find little moments and little areas that you can put a little bit of your own personality into, or maybe it's a song that just kind of lends itself to a little bit of freedom and flexibility to do things slightly different. But as a musician, I think it's a very specific mindset when you listen to music and work on it that way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a conversation that I had with any of the guys. I didn't call them up, and maybe in hindsight I should have. It wasn't a formal conversation. I never called any of the guys and said, okay, what exactly are you looking for? I just knew how I wanted to approach it, and just kind of jumped right in and just really focused on how close can I get. And that's an ongoing thing for me. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently. It's fun with Skid Row and my role within it, watching footage of us live from 6 or 7 years ago versus watching footage of us from earlier this year. There are still things that this is getting better. I like what I'm doing. It's grown. It sounds good. I like it. And I still see little things here and there that I feel like I could do better or could improve upon. I think that's the nature of being an artist. I think we will always do that, but that's good. I don't want to say that I'm never going to be satisfied with it, but I think it's good to be listening that way and still be wanting to push yourself and do things better. Even if it's something that you've done for 15 years, there's always room to do it better or evolve with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting kind of thought process, because at some point you've got to honor the material, but you then become a part of the organism.
Sure. Sure.
And so bits of you are going to start rubbing off onto the way that it's performed and stuff.
Right.
And trying to find that balance is something that, I go back and revisit stuff that I've been playing. At this point, my current project, we're hitting 10 years, and there's still stuff that I was like, oh, I kind of put this little flourish on that's not there.
Right.
Maybe I don't know if it needs to be there.
Right. And now after 10 years, that sounds right. Doing it your way sounds right.
Right. But but then you have to kind of realize, it's like, am I doing this just for me?
Right.
Or, is this a service to what it is I'm trying to do?
Yeah. And every gig is different too. So, there are a lot of situations somebody might come into a pre-existing thing. So drawing a parallel to my experience and coming into something that's pre-existing and established, there are other situations that might be the case, but people are encouraged to take some liberties and reapproach it and do some things to make it their own. That was never, I never felt like that was what this gig for me. I never felt like that was appropriate. I didn't think I'm just going to go in and really dive in and try to get close. So that can be a very ambiguous thing. I think every gig is different. Like you said, every situation is different. Every song is different. Every instrument is different too. Yes. There are certain things that you could get away with and taking liberties on drums that may be deviating that far on you wouldn't want to change your vocal melody if it's an iconic song and something like that. But drum parts, you can kind of get away with a little bit more, I think. Yeah. To the general public. Maybe
halftime when you're supposed to double time or vice versa. Those are things that can be like dynamic, exciting things in a live scenario. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely. But you wouldn't want to just completely retool a vocal melody on a hit song. That would definitely probably not get you a call back.
Have you ever seen Counting Crows?
I have.
It's
Actually, I
infuriating.
saw you at the County Crow show last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is where I saw you. I was like, I couldn't remember which show we were at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember telling you, he's like, have you seen them before? He was like, no. I was like, you're not going to like this.
Yeah. 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 It's a fun show. Yeah. It's it's.
That's so funny. I
Yeah.
totally forgot that's where I saw you. Yeah. Was that the last time we actually like ran into each other?
Probably. Yeah.
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 We're terrible.
And here we are.
Yeah.
20 minutes from each other.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what is the operation in being Skid Row's drummer look like as far as, how far out, when stuff is happening, cartage of your gear, like what are the perks of being in pretty famous rock band?
The perks. I hope I don't sound like a jerk. I don't have to carry a whole lot of drums anymore. That's I say anymore in that context.
Yeah.
I'm still carrying drums. I've got drums in my car right now. Yeah, I don't have to carry drums. It's pretty amazing.
That's rad.
It's pretty amazing. That said, we do a lot of what's called fly dates, so the weekend fly dates, and we're not traveling with our own backline in a lot of situations. So I get a lot of garbage drums. That's part of the gig. You just make it work. I've learned to not really, maybe to a fault, I'm a little lackadaisical about some of those things. I've learned to not sweat the small things. I do have some things that I'm pretty.
Yeah, what are your gear non-negotiables when we're?
Well, I've got a couple. I now travel with my own cowbell.
Okay.
Because
that makes sense.
And anybody who's familiar with the Skid Row catalog knows there are a few songs where the cowbell is prominent. It's a part of that song, and you would miss it if it was not there. And I got a couple months into that gig, and we were doing some fly dates, and I forget where we were. We showed up, and it wasn't in the U.S. It was somewhere outside of the U.S. And we showed up at the gig, and the backline company's version of a rock cowbell might as well have been a woodblock. It might as well. Yeah. So that was the day I decided I travel with my own cowbell. That's just something. This is never going to happen again.
Yeah.
So that's a part of these songs. I mean, talk about feeling castrated on stage when you try to count off monkey business.
Yeah, I can kind of picture in my mind's eye what monkey business would sound like on a castanet.
Well, I'll try to find some footage because it's out there.
Oh, God.
So that's one of those things that I've decided I'm fussy about. I fly with my monitor rig, so my in-ears and those types of things, which is pretty standard. But my kick drum pedal, just because it's comfortable. It's mine, not because it's the best one out there.
What is it? The drummers want to know.
It's a Pearl Eliminator. What they call now, it's the Red Line, but it's a Pearl Eliminator. It's been around for years. It just feels like what I expect a kick drum pedal to feel like. Again, it's just comfortable to me. So I decided a while ago that's one of my things. What else? My sticks, a lot of drummers travel with cymbals and a snare and things like that. I did for a while, but I don't anymore. And I don't know if I hope that's not laziness. I think I've learned to just not sweat a lot of the small things. I have found for me that a lot of the things that I would get hyper focused on when the show starts, 98% of the people in that room, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference. And I don't say that to discredit when things are right or when we have the ability to scrutinize and control all of those variables. We absolutely do. But I've learned to not worry about a lot of things that I did worry about for a very long time. My job is to play. And there comes a point where I've done everything I can do. It's the same song, whether the snare drum sounds like this or it sounds like that.
Well, and there's only so much of that you can control anyway,
Correct.
Because you've got an entire team of people out front that are
Right.
Doing other things. So your job is to hit the thing that's directly in front of you.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And again, that's not to say that I don't take those elements of the job serious, because I do. I've learned. I think I've gotten better at identifying what situations my input is really going to affect the situation and what situations I can't control this. It is what it is. We're here. I don't have my own gear. This is what showed up. We'll make it work.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. I think I've gotten better about it. Some people might argue, but they're not here. So
yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So speaking of people who aren't here, you've been in a group that's had a lot of lineup changes, kind of even during your
Yes.
tenure. And I when I did run into you, Eric had just joined the group, and I was like, man, I'm so hyped for you guys. Everything sounds amazing. And when he decided to step back, that was definitely like it was the right call for him, and I know that sucks. And in that situation, like you have no control over this thing, and you're a part of the core lineup now. How has the past year or so been kind of shifting between personnel in that way?
In a situation like this, it's obviously an emotional roller coaster. You've got a lot of factors at play. There's the business side of things, but you're talking about a health issue.
Yeah.
And we're all adults. We're all reasonable human beings, and we understand that it's unfortunate that it couldn't have gone further than it did, but it is the reality, and you're absolutely right. It's out of your control. Yeah. So one thing I have learned about the original members and the guys in Skid Row, they're incredibly hardworking guys. They're incredibly loyal and committed to this thing that they've worked very hard to create. And this sounds like a cliche answer, but somehow or another, the machine
still seems to work.
Yeah, it continues to roll on, and exactly what our future looks like, I don't know, but it's not the end of Skid Row, that's for sure. Yeah. So,
between that and seeing the footage with Lizzie stepping in on those gigs, which looked like a ton of fun, I know that I had heard that Rachel had mentioned that there are some loose plans to do that with maybe some other folks, until the lineup's kind of solidified. And so I'm assuming you guys still have stuff coming up this year that you're prepping for and ready to do, or?
Yes, no confirmed shows on the books as of this conversation. We are speaking with a few people that might potentially be able to do the special guest slots, exactly what Lizzie had gone out and done with us.
Yep.
We're hoping that can come to fruition before the end of this year. And in the meantime, we are looking for a permanent person, a permanent singer.
Yeah.
So at this point, I don't have any concrete announcements that I can make. But
wasn't looking for a big scoop. Just
it would have been. It would be exciting to have one, but yeah, that's the plan at this point. Things always move slower than you would like them to. As human beings, I think in a situation like this, it's normal to want to hurry up and have an answer and have a solution. And we're really just working through it. And when the time is right, we've got big things coming out. We do have a live record coming out later this year, which we're all very proud of. We worked hard with the mixing and the packaging of the record, so we're all very pleased with that, and we're looking forward to the release of that.
Nice. Yeah. And then if you're off the road for a period of time, like what do you have on the agenda?
Well, I play drums as much as I can at home, spend time with my family. I've got a garage full of motorcycles that are taken apart that I'm trying to get back together this summer. That's it. I'm kind of a quiet homebody.
Yeah.
Playing drums, I do play drums all the time and still love to do it. As you know, I think for people like us, you get to a point, I don't know if you'd still be doing it if you didn't enjoy it. I assume you're the same.
Yeah, there's definitely, the business side of it, the logistics side of it's not always fun.
Right.
But there tends to be like a pocket of time where everything is happening and you're like, yeah, no, it is cool that we get to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of in a nutshell, that's my.
Well, and I know that I see you pop up on studio projects. I know that you've done some stuff with some other groups kind of through that. So
yeah, I try to do that as much as I can. But it's something that I should be more proactive with. Going back to the things that we talked about earlier, a little of that is counterintuitive to my personality. So I'm getting better about that. I'm making more of an effort to put myself out there, as the kids say. So
yeah, the Instagram is popping off. See you posting pics and stuff, and trying to get yourself out there. So
yeah,
it's a good way to just keep keep things moving, keep some momentum happening.
If anybody has any advice on how to work social media, I'm all ears.
This will be an off topic.
All right.
We'll turn the cameras off.
Because I'm finding out that I'm terrible at it. I don't understand it.
You've got some cool aspects of your situation that might make it a bit easier. But again, we can talk about that a little later.
All
right, Rob, if people want to keep in touch with you, figure out what you got going on, how can they follow you?
Instagram is my only social media platform at this point. It's at Rob Hammersmith. I'm not hard to find. Official Skid Row, stay up to date on all the latest. And as I said, for the live record, for updates on release dates and any announcements that we have, that's the best place to keep up with what I'm doing.
Awesome. Rob Hammersmith, folks.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.